So, before I even start, I just want to say how annoying it is that I spent so much time making my hair look this deliberately messy, and you can't appreciate it properly on the camera because the camera flattens everything. So, I'm drawing attention to it specifically so that you can see how great it turned out, even though you can't because it just looks flat and like it's a part of my head and I don't appreciate it, but it is what it is. So, whether you care or not, I cared. So, I'm just drawing attention to my hair that looks fabulous in real life and like a mess, an undeliberate mess on camera. Anyway, so today I am talking about something that is probably not going to be of interest to a lot of people, but it is to me because it's part of my studies and I found it really fascinating, and so I just wanted to share. And I've kind of done a little bit of this before on previous videos because like I said then, when I talk to people about my scholarship and the things that interest me academically, their eyes tend to glaze over, but you are either going to watch it all of the way through because you're a masochist or you're not, and I'll never know. So it's great. Either way, it works for me. So in previous videos, I've kind of touched on here and there that my family moved to Branson last March, and I didn't really know anything about Branson until we moved here. And it was a little bit before we moved here because we came in November of 21 because my brother bought a house. But anyway, so I didn't really know anything about Branson. My parents came down for like an anniversary thing in 2021 when the pandemic was still going on and Branson was kind of recovering. And if you don't know, Branson is kind of like a Christian Vegas, where it's got all of the shows and the lights and the glitz and the glamour, and it's even got a strip and it's got restaurants, and it's got this really cool downtown called Branson Landing, and it's like a mini little Christian Vegas, except there's no gambling. And so they thrive on their tourism industry. It's a town of about 12,000 people that services like 7 million every year. It's one of the biggest drive-in destinations for vacations in America. And I'd never heard of it. I didn't even really know where the Ozarks were. Geography has never been my strongest academic anything. And so I kind of like had a vague idea that the Ozarks were somewhere in the Midwest, but I didn't know where. And I'm mentioning this because Branson is in the Ozarks. And so when my parents came down for their like anniversary honeymoon thing, my parents are perpetually in a honeymoon. I like and have been basically my whole life. They've had like a few bumps here and there, but for the most part, they've basically just been in their honeymoon phase forever. Anyway, so went to Branson for vacation, and they came back just like completely enthralled with it. And my mom handed me this book, and she's just like, "You need to read this." And I was like, "Okay, what is it?" And she said, "It's called The Shepherd of the Hills." And I was like, "Okay." She's like, "It's what Branson is based on." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I put it on the shelf and I kind of forgot about it because life got in the way. I was in the middle of school at the time. I was doing my master's thesis for uh, my master's in communications. And so I didn't really have time to dedicate to a book. So I put it on the shelf and then totally and completely forgot about it. And then we started really looking as a family for places to move for the final time. At the time, it wasn't Branson. It wasn't even necessarily Missouri. We'd been kind of narrowing it down where we wanted to go. We had Tennessee. We had a couple other places. I was leaning hard towards Tennessee. We lived there when I was 10 to almost 13, and I just have really fond memories of it. It's gorgeous. Rolling hills and the green and the country living, and I loved it in Tennessee. So that's kind of where I was leaning, and my mom was leaning in that direction too. And somehow we ended up with Missouri, and we just kind of kept narrowing it down, narrowing it down, narrowing it down. We ended up narrowing it down to more or less the Springfield area. And my brother Zachary called up my parents and said, "Hey, are you guys serious about Branson?" And my parents were like, "Well, we're seriously considering the possibility of Branson." And my brother's like, "Cool, well, I'm putting an offer down on a house." And my mom's like, "Branson it is." So we all came down here that November of 21 to help get them moved in, and because he was turning it into an Airbnb, and so we're getting them situated, getting all of the rooms set up, and painting done and decorating done and all that stuff. And it just kind of resonated with all of us. It was so, I don't know, pure. Like, whether this is your thing or not, it's God, freedom, family all year round, and it feels that way. I mean, there's just something different about Branson. So we were all really, I don't know, called. I guess we felt called to be here, and so we've been slowly moving down here. So my parents, my youngest brother, and I moved down here in March, and on the way down here to move, I finally got around to listening to, because I listened to it on the drive, The Shepherd of the Hills. And I was honestly blown away. It's very, I don't know, should I say traditional? It's very formulaic in the sense of it follows it hits all of the story beats that are very common for these types of stories. And what it is, it's written as a melodrama in the traditional Shakespearean comedic plot format. So if you're familiar with Shakespeare at all, it's kind of like one of the early comedies where it's very kind of, cut and dry. You have a hero, you have a heroine, there's a definite villain, and then there's some ambiguous threads here and there, and there's a lot of like misunderstandings and chaos. I don't think there's any cross dressing though, which is a little disappointing, but not overly so. And then, of course, a happy ending with all of the proper couples being proper couples. So it's a lot of fun. It's very formulaic and traditional, but in a way that you you feel drawn into it because of that. That the almost cliche setup and payoff are really almost kind of cathartic, like a Shakespearean comedy. And because Shakespeare is so well known, I think a lot of his comedies have lost their cathartic appeal, in that we already know how they end, that we've been spoiled, even if we've never read one, even if we've never seen one performed. We've all as a culture been spoiled for the ending of pretty much any Shakespearean comedy, because they've just been around for so long, and they've been done and talked about, and for so long, which is not a problem. But because The Shepherd of the Hills was kind of almost lost to time, not so, I mean, obviously not so in Branson, because of reasons that I'm going to explain, but at at large, people have really forgotten about it, which is a darn shame, because it's really good and it's really fun. So I read it and I was like, I need to know more about the book and the author. So I was just about to start my PhD program, and I'm doing narrative communications, where I bridge the the creative writing aspect with the communications theories, and kind of get that sort of science of story. And so I delved into it. I was taking 2 history of communications classes that semester, which was a terrible idea, and I did not do it on purpose, but I feel was kind of a God thing because it put me so deeply into The Shepherd of the Hills and the author and the other books that he's written. So Harold Bell Wright is the author of The Shepherd of the Hills, and he wrote debated between 5 and 12 best-selling books from 1902 until 19, I don't know, 40 something. I can't remember. He died before, I'm pretty sure he died before either before World War II started or before America entered World War II. I can't remember exactly, but sometime around there. And I mean, he was huge to the point where during the First World War, the boys who were across, you know, the pond as it goes, would go to the lending libraries and ask for books by Harold Bell Wright. And he sold millions of copies of The Shepherd of the Hills alone. And I mean, nobody's heard of this guy. And the reason why is because he wrote for the masses and not for literary acclaim. He was not very well educated, and which is something that actually bothered him a lot. And he passed it off as, he really didn't care to be all that well educated, and yet at the same time it clearly bothered him. It's all throughout his autobiography. He says it's not a real autobiography, but it's obviously autobiographical. Anyway, so throughout his autobiography, he mentions a few times that he's not very well educated in the traditional sense of education, but he was very well learned through living in the world. I mean, if you get the chance, you need to read his autobiography because it's really fascinating. And so while he was a minister for a little while, and while he was a minister in, oh, I'm pretty sure it was Missouri or Kentucky. His tuberculosis, he'd had tuberculosis earlier, and it started acting up. He started having problems. He couldn't do the job of a minister, and so he decided to basically just decided to become a writer. And the first book that he wrote was That Printer of Udell's. And the second book that he wrote, which is the books that he wrote, quote, on purpose, That Printer of Udell's, he wrote as sort of like an example that he wanted to read to his congregation as a sermon, as a sort of allegory for why the church needed to become a church of action and works. And it's like it's all well and good to say that you're a Christian, to say that you follow Christ, to say these things, but if you're not doing the work, then your words are hollow, type of thing. So he wrote The Shepherd of the Hills, and please forgive all of the markings. I, like I said, wrote a paper about it, and I plan to revisit said paper for potential publication, so the markings are still here. But this was published in 1907, and it was like an instant bestseller. It went all over the place. There have been like 3 movies made, 2 silent films, and then one with uh, John Wayne, which was an abomination. And I wish we didn't. I genuinely wish that that was not the reason why people still know the name Shepherd of the Hills, because it's nothing like the book at all. And I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but I heard that at one point John Wayne actually, after having been in the movie, read the book afterward, and then contacted Harold Bell Wright to apologize to him for being involved with the absolute trash that was the movie. But then he has all of these other ones, and this is something that I want to really kind of show you to bring home just how little his works have survived as a I don't know. So it would be kind of like if 100 years from now people didn't know anything about Harry Potter. Not quite to that extent, but I mean he was pretty popular. So these are first editions of some of his best-selling books. So we have The Shepherd of the Hills, When a Man's a Man, The Calling of Dan Matthews, God and the Grocery Man, and The Winning of Barbara Worth. And of these books, these ones I believe were all $25 each. And then The Shepherd of the Hills, I paid, I want to say 50, but I mean, it was less. It might have been well, maybe it was 150. Let me see. The price might be inside of it. No, it's not. Anyway, regardless, I did not pay very much for it at all. And it's actually inscribed. It was a Christmas gift for somebody in 1907. But the fact that I can have this first edition, and that all of these books are first editions. They're not necessarily in the best condition, but they are first editions. For that little amount of money, for as popular as he was, is mind-boggling. And I mean, there's very little scholarship that's been done on his writings in and of itself. Like, of his writing, sure, there are all sorts of scholars that like to talk about how baffled they are that he was so popular because he really sucked as an author, which he didn't, by the way. He was a little rough by the standards of 1907, but by today's standards, extremely eloquent. So there's not a lot about his works, and there are, I mean, there are some things in them. I'm not going to pretend like they're not. He lived in 1907. There were certain prejudices of that era, certain ideas and things like that. Do I condone that? No. But I mean, it was he was a product of his time, and as he grew older, as he learned more, and as society began to change, so did he. But I feel like it's a real disservice to anybody in the past to to condemn them for the lives that they lived based off of the standards of what we have today. I mean, at some point in the future, people are going to look back on where we're living and how we're living right now and judge us for the things that we do. And who knows what it is that they're going to choose to judge us for. But regardless, I digress. So, yeah, you've never heard of this guy, and it's a crying shame. I don't want to spoil The Shepherd of the Hills because it is just such a good read, so much fun. There's the audiobook that I listen to, I highly recommend because the reader did a really fantastic job. He did all of the voices, and there was, I even think, a few places there was music that was put to it. But anyway, at some point I would really like to just read his books on video and have them uploaded to like YouTube or something. And I think that people would really enjoy them because he writes to the common person, and he doesn't talk down to them. He doesn't, condescend to them. He was them. He lived that life. He dug himself out of that life. And everything that he put into his books is basically a formula for how to dig yourself out of a life that you don't want to live, which is one of the reasons why the John Wayne Shepherd of the Hills movie was such a shame. Okay, I really shouldn't talk about that movie because I haven't seen it. I'm like working myself up to seeing it because I've read the book, I've seen the play that's done up at the Shepherd of the Hills homestead, and I read the synopsis of John Wayne's movie, and oh, I'm working my way up to it. At some point, for the sake of scholarship alone, I have to watch it. But just the summary is just so terrible. What they did to Aunt Molly, I just can't. But anyway, I digress. Again, I do that a lot. But anyway, so the thing that's so interesting about the Shepherd of the Hills is what it did for Branson, Missouri. So Branson didn't even really exist at the time that Wright wrote this book. It was he went and he stayed with Mr. and Mrs. Ross, I think was their last name. And their house is still here. It's on the Shepherd of the Hills homestead. And when the book was published, people were so enamored by it that they came to this area specifically to interact with the people in the area, because Old Matt and Aunt Molly are based off of the Rosses, and then of course there's Uncle Ike, who was based off of uh, somebody who actually lived in the area at the time, and then there's allusions to young Matt and also to the heroine of the story, Sammy Lane. And so people would come down here specifically to meet these people. The Rosses had a mill, which is talked about in the book as belonging to the Matthews family, and people literally stripped the mill down to nuts and bolts to take away as souvenirs. They would come to the Ross's homestead and stay with them. And Southern hospitality at the time was, if strangers came, you took them in, you fed them, you gave them a bed for the night. And it got to the point where they were just so overwhelmed they could not take it anymore, and they moved. It's a genuine miracle that their house was not subject to the same vandalism that the mill was. And so the house was eventually saved and restored, and now it's on the homestead. Like I said, Uncle Ike's post office is at the homestead, and people were already super enamored by the idea of the Ozarks anyway. There was this general consensus, I don't know, general something to that effect, um, mysticism almost, where they looked at the Ozarks as this sort of American Arcadia. It was considered God's country, and that's where you went to commune with God through nature. So people would come down here. It was just it was a phenomenon, and the people of the area latched onto that because originally they were a logging community, and they logged pretty much all of the trees. It was just really sad because this forest was, thousands of years old, and they cut down all of the good hardwoods, and now it's only just starting to grow back. 100 years later, our trees are still pretty scrawny, but they needed a new source of income and revenue, so they leaned hard into tourism. And that's kind of where the whole idea of the American hillbilly came from, was from Branson, where people came down to this area expecting to meet hillbillies, and so the locals invented this idea of the hillbilly and played the part on float trips or at reenactments, or just on the street meeting people. It's kind of really bizarre in a way. And so from that, we also got The Calling of Dan Matthews, which is a sequel. It's okay. It's not got the same impact as The Shepherd of the Hills. And then God and the Groceryman is the sequel to The Calling of Dan Matthews, and I haven't read that one yet. I actually haven't read most of his books yet. which is one of the reasons why I want to read them on videos, because then we can, it's almost like a reaction video because I'm reading it at the same time that you are. But yeah, so I haven't read most of his books. I read his autobiography, was absolutely amazing. The last two chapters are particularly impactful, I felt. I just, when I finished it, I just felt resonant, and I kind of closed it, and it was almost, I don't know, it was almost like a spiritual experience. It was just so, I can't even really explain it. But anyway, I just needed to talk about this because the impact that this man has had on our culture and on Branson specifically, obviously, and then also on Tucson because he lived there for a good while, and he wrote several books that took place in that. When a Man's a Man it takes place outside of Tucson. Um, so yeah, but I just, I needed to share because his, The Shepherd of the Hills, at least, is really phenomenal, and I look forward to finally having some leisure time to read some more of his books because it's just so great. If you get the chance, read it. If you get the chance to come to Branson, come. It's it's a lot like reading the last two chapters of his autobiography. There's just a certain resonance here that can't be denied and is very difficult to explain.
Hey guys, thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like, subscribe, and do all those things that you do when you enjoy a video. If you'd like to learn more about us at Moms for America or the Millennial Rant, you can visit our website at millennialrant.com or see us on our Instagram page at millennial_rant. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.